We've been going through the book of Zechariah, and Zechariah has visions, 10 visions, and we've been going through them in order. And now we get to a very interesting vision in the first half of chapter 6. There are two in this chapter. And I'm going to read it, and then we'll take a look and see if we can determine what it means. And then I'll share with you what my conclusions are after spending a lot of time trying to figure out what this means. I looked up again, and there before me were four chariots coming out from between two mountains, mountains of bronze. Okay, so the chariots mean they were going fast, and the chariots normally would be used in wartime. Okay, so this appears to be warfare, but it's not clear. Okay, and coming out between two mountains of bronze, and there have been many guesses as to what those mountains are, Mount Sinai, Mount Zion, and so on, but it doesn't tell us. It says they're of bronze. Bronze, of course, was a very strong metal, typically used for weaponry and also for protection, for armor. The first chariot had red horses, the second black, the third white, and the fourth dappled, all of them powerful. Now, horses, the chariots at that time would have typically used um, two horses. And so these were big war chariots. And if this were modern parlance, if this were written today, it might be extremely fast cars, or it might have been jet planes. Okay, obviously at that point the vehicles of war were horses. And then he said, I asked, this is Zechariah speaking, I asked the angel who was speaking to me, and recall that there was an angel speaking through him constantly. Um, what are these, my Lord? Okay, so he didn't know. He was confused. And the angel answered, these are the four spirits of heaven going out from standing in the presence of the Lord of the whole world. Now, whenever you see the word spirits, it translates in the Old Testament, translates a Hebrew word ruach, which it could also be translated wind. Now, interesting, in the New Testament, the word there in Greek also could mean spirit or wind. So in John chapter 3, when Jesus is talking about the wind in the trees, that you don't see the wind, but you see the leaves move. Um, the wind is picturing the spirit. You don't see the spirit, but you see the results of what the spirit does. You see people getting changed by the spirit of God, but you don't see the spirit, just as you don't see the wind. Now, but here when it talks about the four spirits, oops, I'm sorry, sorry, I'm just, I guess, clicking in the wrong place. But when you see the four spirits here, this says more about them than just that they're spirits. It says specifically going out from standing in the presence of the Lord. Well, those are four specific spirits. And let's take a look at those four specific spirits. Those are the cherubim. Now, when you think of cherubim, and remember, I am is the Hebrew way for making something plural. When you think of the cherubim, you think of these little um, uh, baby angels with wings, chubby and in Renaissance era paintings. Well, that's not what the cherubs are at all. Okay, so we go back to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel also was having visions. And in Ezekiel chapter 1, we see the four spirits. Okay, so he's standing there on the banks of the Kibar River, and uh, it says, there the hand of the Lord was on him. And he says, I looked, okay, similar to what Zechariah said. I looked up, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light. Now, as you go farther in, you find out it's multicolored brilliant light. Um, and then it says the center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like four living creatures. Okay, and we'll find out those are those four spirits. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had four faces and four wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had human hands. All four of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Okay, and so as he goes through, he describes them in more detail. And these are the four angels that stand in the presence of God, the four spirits that stand in the presence of God. Now, the 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 one in the middle is explained, uh, some verses later, and it says there. Then there came a voice from above the vault over their heads. That's the angels and this person in the middle. Above the vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, so a blue gemstone, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. That's the one in the middle. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him, like the appearance of a rainbow, so multicolored in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the rainbow around him. And then he explains what it is. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So basically, in the center, you have the Shekinah glory. And so it's this picture that he sees that is real, and it's very different from anything he could have ever imagined. But you have angels standing around Jehovah, standing around the glory of the Lord. Now, in the Ark of the Covenant, or above the Ark of the Covenant, in the Holy of Holies, God gave instructions to put angels on above it, facing one another, with their wingtips just touching. And so that was a depiction of what we're reading here in Ezekiel chapter 1, that is closer to the reality of what we would see. Because in the middle between the angels, God's Shekinah glory would appear. And Shekinah is just an Aramaic word that means that dwells with us. So, and it's not all of God, it's just how God manifests himself to us. The person on the throne here is not all of God. God is everywhere. But that's how he chose to manifest himself to Ezekiel. And it is a picture of the throne of God. And there is his glory. Now, glory has in mind light, bright light. Um, you remember when the angels appeared to the shepherds when Jesus was born, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. Okay, this incredible light that does not have an earthly source. But notice that the color of the light was like a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. Okay, that is God's sign. That's what, and I'd say it's God's sign because that's what he gave to Noah as his sign that he would not destroy the earth by flood again. And so when you look up and see the rainbow, know that you are seeing just the fringes of what you would see if you were in the presence of God. This incredibly bright light. The beauty of God is impossible for us to imagine. But when you see the descriptions, the multicolored gemstones just trying to capture this multicolored light and some element of the beauty of it, just reflections almost of God. It's an amazing thing. The important point is notice the four spirits. Okay. And these are the four spirits. So let's go back now to Zechariah. So now we see that they're riding horses, that horses have different colors. And some have attempted to compare this with Revelation 6, four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, the first horseman there is the Antichrist. Well, he's not in this mix. When you look at what they're doing, it's so you really can't use that. And the colors may have significance, but it's not clear and obvious. I could speculate, but you might remember the speculation, and it's only speculation. Okay, so the angel now attempts to explain um, what these are. Okay, so Zechariah's question, I don't know what these are. What are these, my Lord? He says, well, these are the four spirits of heaven going out from standing in the presence of the Lord of the whole world. Okay, so now we know it's the four spirits from Ezekiel. So that we know, the ones who stand in the presence of God. And by the way, they don't stand in the presence of God to protect God. They stand in the presence of God to protect us from him. Because a sinner coming close to the God of the universe, a sinful sinner, there's no way that to imagine how bad that would be. You don't want that. Thankfully, we have Jesus who stands in our place before God. Um, and then we see that they are going out, uh, and the one with the black horse is going toward the north, the one with the white horse toward the west, the one with the dapple horses toward the south. Um, and so what we see is they're going in different directions. And it says, when the powerful horses, so these aren't just horses, these are really powerful horses, they were straining to go throughout the earth. And he said, go throughout the earth. So they went throughout the earth. Um, and so you have these angels, they're going throughout the earth, uh, rapidly, going everywhere. And then he called to me, to Ezekiel. Sorry, that's going to look strange on the video. Then he called to me, look, those going toward this north country have given my spirit rest in the land of the north. Okay, so um, what we see is some things that we can understand, but in its totality, I don't understand it. Okay, and what I found was most commentators don't understand it. There are some who think this is in the tribulation. There are, all kinds of guesses as to what this means. Um, it could have to do with the fulfilling of the Great Commission, going throughout the world, as the four spirits go throughout the world. Um, the reality is, we don't know. Now, prophecy is given, and this is an important thing to understand, so that after it happens, you can know that God did it, that God said he would do it, and then that he did it. Um, it is not given to satisfy our curiosity about the future. And let me tell you, curiosity is a very real thing about the future. The angels, or we're told, were curious. They wanted to know the future. They didn't know. Um, they wanted to look into these things. Okay, but uh, now, when you look at eschatology and the detailed calendars of how God is going to work in the future, remember that you can open many different books, even from people coming from exactly the same school of thought, and you will discover that they have minor disagreements. And then there are multiple schools of thought, meaning there are major disagreements of how things are going to work out. Is Jesus going to come before the tribulation? Is he going to come mid-tribulation? Is he going to come after the tribulation? Will the saints be taken out of the world for a period of time? Will that be the timing when the Lord returns and establishes the new heavens and the new earth? How does millennium fit into that? And you could go crazy reading all the books. And then people will take sides and many times argue, and in some cases determine that anybody who doesn't hold to the same view is unorthodox. Well, these are interpretations, trying to understand what these things mean. If you were to go back to when Jesus came the first time, the Jews had all the information, the detailed information. And when Herod called the priests and the scribes to come and find and tell him where will the Messiah be born? Um, you know, they were able to tell him. So there were a lot of things they knew, but they couldn't put together the pieces and determine that Jesus was the Messiah. Instead, Herod tried to kill him. They, and how could they reconcile? Um, he'll come up out of Egypt. He'll be called a Nazarene, and he'll be born in Bethlehem. Okay, so where was he born? What was his origin? It seems like there are three places. They couldn't figure out the Old Testament prophecies that he was going to be a servant, but he was also going to be a king. Well, how do you compare those? He was going to suffer and be the suffering servant, and he was going to be the conquering ruler. Okay, so you see, when you hold to views about the future and what God is going to do, hold on to it loosely. I used to sit on a lot of ordination councils, and I was always struck by the fact that so much of the emphasis was what is the candidate's view of eschatology? They wanted to find out if he had the correct view. And most of the councils that I sat on, the people came from a dispensational background. And so it was very definite as to when the Messiah would come, in relation to the tribulation. And it was very definite as to what was going to happen. Well, God's the God of surprises. He gives us hints. And his whole goal, and Jesus makes it clear, and we see it as well, um, in the epistles. The whole goal is be ready. Be ready. You may be convinced in your heart that certain things have to happen before the Lord returns, but I can tell you, he could return in the next 10 minutes. And then when you look backwards, you would say, wow, yeah, he fulfilled all those prophecies. Just like now, we look at Jesus' first coming and we look at the 300 plus prophecies that he fulfilled, and he did in such an intricate way. It's incredible. And many of you know, I came to the Lord as I studied those fulfilled prophecies. The odds of anybody just fulfilling even a small number of them by accident, it's impossible, astronomical odds. Okay, so all of what I've just said is to tell you I have no clue what that means in Zechariah verses 1 through 6. I have some guesses, but I really don't know. Now we get to the next section, and here I can tell you a lot. This is God speaking to him. Take silver and gold from the exiles, Heldai, Tobijah, and Jediah, who have arrived from Babylon. So these are recent um, newcomers who have come from Babylon, and they have brought with them silver and gold. And remember, all the silver and gold was purged and plundered from the temple and from Israel when Nebuchadnezzar conquered it. And it was all up in Babylon. Well, there were people there in the 70 years they were there. They were merchants. They did various other things. They worked and they accumulated silver and gold. Three of them now have come from Babylon, and they're newcomers, and they're going to be settling locally. And so Zechariah is told, go the same day to the house of Josiah, son of Zephaniah. So there's some speed required. Um, and he says, that apparently is where these three are staying. take the silver and gold and make a crown and set it on the head of the high priest Joshua, son of Josadak. Okay, so um, now he is saying you're going to make a crown. Okay, a circlet is really how you would translate it, but it's a crown, and it's going to have both silver and gold. So now these three men brought it not for a crown, but you would presume that they brought silver and gold so that they'd be able to live well in this new land that they were moving to, Israel. Um, and he goes, he's a prophet. They certainly must have accepted that because they give him the silver and gold. Um, and it's going to be a crown. And now this is really weird if you think about it. Set it on the head of the high priest, Joshua, son of Josadak. So he is saying this is the ruler. However, they had a godly ruler in Zerubbabel who was descended from the line of David. Joshua, son of Jehozadak, is a priest, and he's the high priest, meaning he had to be of the line of Levi. He wasn't descended from David at all. Okay, so he can't be the Messiah, you would say, because he's a priest, and he is from the line of Levi. Okay, and so um, the priest is not supposed to be a ruler. In the form of government that the Jews had, the priests were separate from the rulers. You had the prophets, priests, and kings, and in a sense, they kept one another honest, or at least tried to. Um, and you saw times when the priests could, or the prophets were upbraiding the king. And when Uzziah attempts to be a priest, remember King Uzziah? He attempts to be a priest and he offers a sacrifice, even though they all tell him don't do it. And immediately after he offers the sacrifice, leprosy starts to break out on his body, which is clearly an indication of uncleanness and God's displeasure. And he spends the rest of his life locked up, suffering from leprosy. So there was this wall between the two. And now we're being told that the priest is going to be crowned the king. And then we find out a little bit more. And on this side of these events, we can understand it, but they could not understand it. And so for them, the prophecy at that time, for Zechariah, the prophecy would not have made a lot of sense, but he understood bits and pieces of it. So, so what happens then is the word of the Lord comes, and uh, Zechariah is to go to these three newcomers, and then the same day go to the house of Josiah, son of Zephaniah. I'm sorry, the three are not staying at the house of Josiah. Take the silver and gold, make a crown, and so essentially anoint Joshua as the king. Okay, makes no sense at first. Now you begin to find out, verse 12. Tell him this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here is the man whose name is the branch. Okay, now, two chapters back, we're told that Joshua is symbolic. Okay, and here we find out what he is symbolic of. He is symbolic of the Messiah. Okay, because it says, tell him this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here's the man whose name is the branch. Okay, and that word in Hebrew, that concept, the branch, because they actually used a couple of words that are translated branch. That concept uh, really is something that you see throughout the Old Testament. The place where you see it most clearly is Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 1. Okay, a shoot will come up or a branch will come up from the stump of Jesse, and from his roots a branch will bear fruit. Okay, so the name that, or one of the names that was commonly given to the Messiah by the rabbis at that time and since is the branch. The branch. Now, you see the same thing in the New Testament. Um, Now, Jesus came from Nazareth. Well, the word there, the name has meaning, just like Bethlehem, the place where he was born, has meaning. Beth is house, Lechem is bread, Bethlehem is the house of bread. Nazareth or Netzareth um, is, the ETH means the place of, and Netzer is the word for branch. So he was living in the place or the home of the branch, Nazareth. And you see these tiny little things, the places, the names of places, in some cases, the names of people, where they have incredible significance. Okay, and so Jesus is the branch. The promised Messiah is the branch. So now, and we can look at other verses that say the same thing, but you get the picture. Okay, and so what we're being told here, he is the man whose name is the branch. Well, what is his name? His name is Joshua. Well, Joshua, um, in the Old Testament, um, if you look at the Greek, it's translated Jesus, which is also the Greek for Jesus. Um, and we might actually say it better, Yeshua, Joshua. And it's the same word. It's the name Jesus. It means Jehovah or Yah is salvation. Yahweh is salvation. Jehovah is salvation. Um, uh, Jesus. Here, do you see this in Zechariah chapter 6? They're being told, and we're being told, the name of the Messiah is Jesus. Just in case you think he's not, turns out before he was born, his name was given. Now, you can see the same thing with Cyrus, where his name was given in advance. The Jews were told before Cyrus came into power that the one who would send them back would be the king named Cyrus. God can actually do that. He knows the future. He exists out of time. He sees things not in a linear fashion as we do, but he sees the breadth and scope of history before it even happens. Okay, and here it is clear his name is Jesus. Underline this section in your scripture. It's a very interesting one to share with your Jewish friends. Isaiah 53 is another one. There are any number of great verses in the Old Testament. If you look at Isaiah 48, you will find the description of the Trinity. Three people all claiming to be God. One person, two persons, three persons in one being, God. Um, you can look at when you look at the Trinity, you can look at the Shema, which is Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Echad. It's hard to say that gutturally. That is what every Jewish child is taught to prove that God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, except the word that's used is echad. And that particular choice of words to translate as one has a meaning that is something more than just an absolute unity. So that in Genesis, when we're told that, and the two shall become one flesh, it's echad flesh. Well, yes, it is two people, but two people in one flesh. It's a crazy thing. You see it appearing over and over. When the spies come back from the Valley of Eshcol after they've gone into the Promised Land, they bring back these huge clusters of grapes. They bring back echad, cluster of grapes. Well, there are many grapes in that one cluster. So it is this idea of some type of multiplicity in unity. And you'll see it other places as well in the Old Testament. And so there are all these little hints. It says, and then, so when you see these, recognize that everything is understandable when you look backwards, if you study it. But looking forwards into the future that has not existed yet for us, although exists in the mind of God, um, don't be absolutely certain, but for the past you can be. Um, and then it says, and he will branch out from his place and build the temple of the Lord. Okay, so this branching out and temple, this is interesting. The branch is somehow identified with the temple. So let's go to the New Testament now and let's take a look. It's funny. Every time I bring up the search, it keeps coming up with something in there that I'm not searching for. Okay, so let's take a look at John, oops, chapter 15. Okay, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. You see, now the branch is referring to individuals, and that the goal is fruit. Well, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So we see continue this idea of the Messiah as the main branch, a stem shall rise up from the root of Jesse. Okay, and that's the Messiah, he who branches off. Um, Paul talks about how the Gentiles have been grafted in. And again, you have this agricultural view of things because people farmed, they understood these things. And here it's talking about a branch of a vine. And you know how vines grow, and they have lots and lots and lots of branches. Um, but he's specifically talking about, well, the branch that does bear fruit, he promises. Um, I'm sorry, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Okay, and what I want you to see though is this branch and this vine. I am the vine, he says. You are the branches. So now we find out that it's a far more complex vine. If you remain in me and I in you, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So now he's talking about this as a living organism. And it is clearly an image of the church, those who are connected to Jesus. And those who are connected to Jesus are those who have the Shekinah glory dwelling within them. They're connected to Jesus. Um, then he says, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Okay, and so now we see that what Zechariah was talking about, Jesus begins to explain more about and expand on this whole concept, God's concept, that it's an organism, that it's a plant, it's a vine, um, and that it is intended for a purpose, and the purpose is fruit. Okay, so what is the fruit? Well, let's just take a look for a moment and say, okay, Galatians 5. He speaks about living by the Spirit, and then he says, this is how you can know that the Spirit lives in you. Okay, now, lives in you, abides in you, remains in you. And he says, then there is fruit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, or forbearance, kindness, uh, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Okay? The fruit is demonstrated in your character. As a person walks with God over time, having come to Christ, God builds in them the image of Jesus in their personality. Every Christian looks different. But if you find somebody who's been walking with the Lord for a long time, you'll find out the personalities are amazingly similar. Oh, there are distinctives that are unique to them. But ultimately, you see they're loving, they're joyful, they're peaceful, they're patient, they're kind, they're good, they're faithful, they're gentleness, and they're self-controlled. That's what should happen. You should progress through this sequence over time. Um, joy. There was a great revival at Wheaton College years ago, and somebody commented during the time of that awakening that they never saw more smiles per square face. Just the idea that people were joyful. And you recall in the Old Testament, Nehemiah reading the scriptures, reading the law after they had rebuilt the walls. And the first time for many of these people, because they had been in captivity in Babylon, and the first time that they really heard it, and they were struck to the heart, and they were depressed, and they were upset. How could our people, our ancestors, our parents have been so horrible? We had so much, and it all got destroyed, and we were driven into captivity, and they were miserable. And then he said, no, 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 this day is sacred to the Lord. And so, and my concept of sacred when I was younger was, well, okay, that's a big building you go into, and there's this kind of hush over the whole thing. This is a sacred place. Well, that's not what it means at all. Sacred means separated unto God, just like holy means separated unto God. Saint, somebody who is separated unto God. Okay, and what do you find there when you're separated unto God? Joy. And so Nehemiah says, this day is sacred. Rejoice. The joy of the Lord is your strength. You draw close to the Lord, what do you find? You find joy. You don't find pain and suffering and him wagging his finger at you saying, you are just such a horrible person. I know how bad you are. No, no, no. As you draw close to the Lord, you should find great joy. And C.S. Lewis spoke about the fact that after coming to the Lord, he was surprised by joy. He came intellectually, and he wasn't anticipating that he would find this incredible joy. So the fruit of the Spirit, the manifestation that the Holy Spirit is actually in you, okay, you should see these things in increasing measure in your life. If you have not, if you're the exact same person you were years ago when you came to the Lord, then you have to really do what Paul says, examine yourself to see if you're in the faith. Okay, and so anyhow, what we see then is this vine, and we see that the Spirit is in the people who trust Christ. And let's go back now and see in John, oh, one more back because I went to the wrong place there before. Okay. And so he says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, it will be done for you. Um, and he speaks more about all of this. He says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. You now remain in my love. Remember, love is the first of the fruits. If you keep my commands, this is how you do it, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in my love. Okay, remember his command? A new command I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you. It's not about church attendance, although it's certainly good to go to church and you meet other believers and you encourage one another. It's not about giving, just to, oh, I tithe, therefore I'm a great Christian. No, it's not that. It's not about a whole lot of things that many people would say, oh, well, that person's a committed Christian because they're always in attendance. Well, attendance is actually a relatively low level of commitment. It's being somewhere. And so here he's saying remain. Now, the Greek word is meno, and he repeats it multiple times, and he's talking about in relationship to the vine. Um, and here remaining in my love and staying on the vine and bearing fruit. Obviously, if a branch is cut off, it's not going to bear any fruit. But the word meno, translated remain, um, has a deeper meaning. So if you go back to the prior chapter, okay, what you see, by the way, he repeats again here, if you love me, keep my commands. Um, they, but he says here, okay, so right at the beginning, he's told them he's going to be going away and their hearts are troubled. And he says, you believe in God, believe also in me. And then he says, my father's house has many rooms. See that word room? Okay, that is the noun of minnow. That is the noun of remain. Now, I'll give you a better translation that matches the way English works. Both translations are correct. Rooms is not, some translation had mentioned houses here, mansions here. Um, I go to prepare a place for you. Okay, he says. All right, so abodes, abiding places. My father's house has many abiding places, many places to live, abiding places, abodes. The individual places will be when we get to heaven. Okay, and then we continue down here, and you see where it says remains. If you abide in me, you read in the King James. Okay, so it's the idea of living in him. And then, and I in you, and him living in us. Okay, so we can think about it in terms of houses and mansions and all of that. But no, it has to do with our relationship with Jesus, being connected to him as the branches are connected to the vine. Okay, now he is the branch. So if we go back now to Zechariah 6, his name is going to be Jesus, the name of the branch. Here is the man whose name is the branch. Okay, now I'll share with you just an interesting little story. When I started my last company, I named it Radix. And I named it Radix because radix is a Latin word that means, well, it's the root word for radical, which means to cut back to the root. Okay, and um, I didn't think it had any significance biblically, um, but that's when I named it. And some years after I had sold the company, I was sitting in church and sitting in a pew, and I forget what the message was, but suddenly the thought occurred to me, I wonder if radix has significance in the scriptures. So yeah, I have, on my phone, multiple translations, and one of them is Latin. My Latin is not very good, but I looked up the word, and sure enough, it's there in the Latin translation, and it translates a particular word. The word it translates is branch. So without realizing it, I suspect this was the leading of the Lord, um, because it's a very weird name to name a company. without realizing it, I had named my company The Branch. And so it's just, God works all kinds of things together. It's amazing. But then it says you'll branch out from this place and build the temple of the Lord. Now, um, he's talking about the temple. Okay, so you read some commentators and say, well, this is the third temple. I don't believe it's the third temple. I believe what we're dealing with is the church. So if you take a look at Ephesians 2:19, and we'll look at this quickly, because that is what he is building. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as as the I'm sorry, as the chief cornerstone. I was talking about the temple. It's not household, it's his temple. We're being built into his temple. In him, the whole building is joined together and rises to become here it is, a holy temple in the Lord. And in him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. So, what this is all about, or abides by his Spirit, God wants to live in us. This is one of the great mysteries that Paul reveals. Now, mystery in the New Testament means secret, one of the secrets that we find out now. Christ in you. Behold, I tell you a mystery. Christ in you. We have this glory in jars of clay. Okay, in First Peter chapter 2, what we see is this developed even more. And if we look at verse 5, let's look at verse 4 first. As you come to him, the living stone, okay, the cornerstone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living pebbles, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Okay, and then he quotes some verses from the Old Testament talking about this, that in fact, we are a chosen people, he says down here. We're chosen to be part of his dwelling. God wants to dwell in us, and he wants us to dwell with him. And our role is as priests offering sacrifices. So he talks specifically about spiritual sacrifices. Now, let's go to um, Romans chapter 12, and we see what our spiritual sacrifice is. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, in the last few chapters has been talking about the fact that you were grafted in as branches to the root of Jesse, grafted into the tree that was originally, or the vine that was originally just the Jews. But now you're chosen too. You're grafted in, you Gentiles. And you are to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And here's bad translation NIV. This is your true and proper worship. Well, yes, that is true. But better translation is this is your spiritual worship, spiritual sacrifices, spiritual worship, not the sacrifice of animals. There's no sin that has to be paid for by sacrifice. But the pattern of Jesus was to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. And that's what we're called to do. When he says, keep my commands, well, what are the commands? Okay, love one another, even as I have loved you. Well, how did he love us? No greater love than this has no man, that he lays down his life for his friends. It's the sacrifice of ourselves for others. That's what we're called to do. That's the fruit that you see. Okay, when you look at the fruit, loving people, agape love, by definition means you're giving to others of yourself without any expectation in return. What's that called? Sacrifice. The old translations, like King James, in many of the places where you have agape, instead of translating as love, will translate it as charity. Now abide these three: faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest of these is charity, because faith and hope, when we get before the throne of God, and we see Jesus as he is, well, at that point, you don't need faith and hope anymore. They pass away. All that's left is love. All that's left is charity, and that is eternal. It's what we do. What is our work going to be in heaven? Well, at least some part of the work, and the vast majority of it, will be caring for the needs of others. I don't know how that works, but this is just, I find the whole concept here really amazing, exciting, and we can drop into the error of seeing everything completely literally. He's building a temple with stones and cornerstone. So, no, no, no. He's building something spiritual, and we're part of that.